Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say regarding the elections in Venezuela, I share many of your concerns, and I'm going to have another venue where I will be responding to that further. But certainly, it's a real concern. It's obvious, Secretary Campbell, thank you for being here today. It's obvious to all that China's ambitions are global. It is proactive in every region and reaps strategic benefit from chaos in Europe and the Middle East. China's support for fentanyl trafficking and its spy post in Cuba demonstrate a desire to target the United States and undermine our efforts to prioritize resources to compete with them. That said, the administration wrongfully insists it is winning the competition with China. Not so. Let's start with the Indo-Pacific. The balance of power in the region continues to move in China's favor. The administration's response to China's escalation against the Philippines at Second Thomas Shoal has been limited to verbal assurances, but no concrete action. Talking about a treaty without strong action only encourages China to further test U.S. resolve. On AUKUS, we have not realized the promise, the bright promise of this partnership. It was supposed to be a game changer, but states' exclusion of the exact technologies we need to advance AUKUS has inhibited this partnership from moving aggressively to reality. On Europe, yesterday I published a report that evaluated the administration's policies to strengthen transatlantic unity on China. Across the board, especially on trade and African policy, the administration's record is dismal. China is tightening its linkages with our adversaries, and the administration is doing almost nothing about it. China is providing material support to Russia's war effort. Secretary Blinken often repeats that 70% of machine tools and 90% of microelectronics used in Russian weapons come from China. He's right. But the administration has not acted in proportion to the scale of these sins. Recent actions on some Chinese microelectronics companies are ridiculously inadequate. Aggressively targeting China should be the top priority in U.S. sanctions policy. Mr. Campbell, in your confirmation hearing, you assured me you understood the risks of inviting China into a peace process for Ukraine. You recall that, I'm sure. Since then, the department officials have told this committee that China must be at the table because its presence will somehow create daylight between it and Russia. I find this preposterous. So today, I'm going to ask you, what is our policy? Do you and the administration really believe China should have a say in European security affairs? On Iran, because the administration has failed to curb Chinese purchases of Iranian oil, Congress had to pass new legislation to sanction China. We expect the administration to pursue sanctions in compliance with the law. To date, we don't see much enthusiasm. Despite all these issues, the president welcomed Xi to the United States in November. The Biden-Harris administration agreed without getting any reciprocal commitments to facilitate Chinese engagement on climate with state and local actors in the United States, even though China clearly uses this subnational diplomacy for malign purposes. The administration then supported this initiative's first events at Berkeley, a university that has failed to report hundreds of millions in research funding from China. Last year, I predicted China would agree to new dialogues to placate us, only to use these initiatives against us later. They just did that by canceling arms control talks yet again. How did State Department respond? By publishing our U.S. nuclear stockpile totals so she knows that we are reducing our capabilities while China grows. And of course, reciprocity did not follow. The only thing it did was save China the expense of going through the usual spy proceedings to get the size of our U.S. nuclear stockpile. Ridiculous. This is not competing. This is pandering. We cannot keep making these mistakes. China must be an American issue, not a Republican or Democrat issue. Congress has tried for more than a year to negotiate a bipartisan China bill, but efforts have failed because the administration and some up here love to talk about tougher policies to limit China's aggressive behavior, but only talk and won't act to actually take tough action. They don't want to limit PRC's money in our universities. They don't want to reform foreign lobbying laws. They don't want to stop nuclear dialogues to give China clear insight into our nuclear programs, and they support international energy policies that actually undermine our partners' economic reality and needs. It's time for our government to wake up to the real challenges China presents and start taking concrete action. The days of admiring the problem from afar must be over. Congress needs to update the Foreign Agents Registration Act, reduce foreign influence in universities and think tanks, punish China for abuse of U.S. diplomats, advance real economic agendas with our partners, oppose China's growing clout at the IMF, and much, much more. It's past time we take a tougher line to stop Chinese malign influence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for being here, and I always appreciate your understanding of these issues and frankness. At your confirmation hearing, we talked about the situation of inviting China into the peace process for Ukraine, and you expressed your agreement with me that this wasn't a good idea, which is an understatement. In the meantime, the State Department officials have told this committee that China must be at the table. I'm assuming, like a lot of things, there isn't complete agreement, but help me understand this. Where are we on this, and how hard are we going to have to push to get this done right? It seems that our European partners get this, and for whatever reason, the place where you work doesn't seem to get this. So help me out.
Thank you, Senator. To be honest, I'm not aware of those consultations that you have had. I will also tell you that I would generally say any kind of discussion like that is premature. The dominant arena of engagement is on the battlefield. I see no sign of Russians in any way easing up on their brutal offensives with Ukraine. If you signal too early your interest in getting to the negotiating table, I think it sends the wrong message, and it's a signal of weakness more generally. Ultimately, I had extensive discussions with your team about this. Senator, I must say I found those arguments quite persuasive, and I am personally troubled by China's actions, publicly stating that, we're in favor of peace, we're not taking sides, but then privately providing the support for their industrial base in ways that will change the balance of military power, not just in Ukraine, Senator, but in Europe for decades to come. So I find those quite troubling. I think they have to be accounted for more directly. I believe the United States, with its key partners in Europe, have to play the dominant role if we find ourselves in a situation which we hope for, that we can arrive at a just peace with Ukraine and Russia. We are nowhere near that right now, Senator. And so talk about what the nature of the table looks like and who's sitting around it, that's premature.
Great thoughts. It seems to me that the Europeans and the rest of the world made a huge mistake with Russia over recent decades, thinking they were something that they weren't. And now the price is being paid for that. And I think the problem is there's some people making the same mistake right now with China, thinking that there's something that they're not. And your observation that that mistake could carry consequences that goes into generations, I agree with 100%. I think the Europeans, because of their experience with Russia, are very, very reluctant to make the same mistake with China. So, and I think China hasn't helped either. Europe's experience with the Lithuanians with China has really, really woken up the Europeans as to what they're dealing with as far as China's concerned. Look, Congress recently passed legislation on a bipartisan basis to sanction China for the oil purchases. And I'm not seeing, there was a lot of enthusiasm up here on the Hill for that. I'm not seeing the same enthusiasm for the administration, which isn't surprising because whenever we talk about sanctions, Treasury always pushes back to a degree, state always pushes back. We up here seem to be a little more ready to draw that weapon and use it. Your thoughts?
Look, Senator, we've engaged on this quite a bit. I really understand and take your points to heart. I would point out, and I think you know it, you've heard it so many times, of the hundreds of other sanctions that we have undertaken more directly. I do think, and I will just state clearly, that Iran is an implacable foe of the United States. We have to contest them everywhere, not just in the Middle East, not just with respect to the Houthis, but increasingly the role that they are also playing on the battlefields of Europe in Ukraine. So I take that very seriously. I understand the points. Sanctions policy, as you underscore, Senator, and you understand, are complex. There are often concerns about certain steps that you might take in a financial arena could have secondary, tertiary effects. I don't mean that as an excuse, but these are complex matters. I do think we have taken consequential steps, but I need to take back to the building a specific set of recommendations that you carry. I do also want to just point to something that you raised at the outset. Europe has had two major challenges. One is the Russia energy and national security challenge. Many of these countries had hoped for a deeper economic and commercial relationship with China. I will tell you, after substantial discussions, both in my previous job, Senator, and this job, Europeans understand the risks. They are coming around. We're working much more consequentially with them, not just on Russia, but China as well.
My time's up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Coons.